from the working at the University of Wollongong. So Lowell, once again, thank you very much for coming to this event. I'm sure that the participants will learn a lot from you, and I'm also will be here to listen to your presentation. I think that's it. I just don't want to talk too much, but basically I just would like to say hello and welcome to our great presenter today. Thank you very much once again. So Irma.
Thank you, Pak Andi. The next agenda for first session will be hosted by Vincent Tandi. I would also like to introduce our moderator for today. Vincent Tandi is from Indonesia. He finished his bachelor degree in geodetic engineering at Universitas Gadjah Mada in August 2021. Vincent, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Irma, for giving me this opportunity to lead this discussion. As Irma already mentioned, my name is Vincent Tandi, and I will be the moderator for this course titled The Archipelagic Stage, and will be presented by Dr. Lowell Bautista from the University of Wollongong. Good morning from Indonesia, Dr. Lowell Bautista. I also would like to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Lowell Bautista finished his Bachelor of Laws degree at the University of the Philippines, Master of Laws degree in the Dalhousie University, and PhD of International Law at the University of Wollongong. So, without any further ado, let us welcome our speaker for today's course, Dr. Lowell Bautista. You have about 75 minutes. The stage is all yours. Thank you.
Yes, good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, good.
Thank you so much. Terima kasih banyak, Andy and Irma and Vincent. Magandang hapon, good afternoon. And before I begin, please allow me to express my appreciation and joy and delight in participating in this summer course. As Dr. Andy Arsana mentioned, we are very good friends, and I consider myself fortunate to be counted among his friends. And indeed, our friendship has now been over 10 years. And I also share my admiration of Andy, and I commend Andy as well as Dr. Hasbi Rusty for their excellent organization of this summer school. And I hope in the next hour or so you'll learn something from this lecture. So what are we covering in this lecture? I've been given the task to discuss archipelagic states. And hopefully it's a weekend in Australia, and hopefully whichever part of the globe you are, you're keeping safe, you're looking after yourself. It's very difficult times we're in. I hope you're mindful of your mental health. And among my other hats is also I'm also a teacher. So I've seen personally how this pandemic has affected all of us. But also there are other positives. So we are able to communicate and teach remotely. We're able to see me. We're actually in the middle of a lockdown at the moment in Sydney. So we are experiencing a surge in COVID-19 Delta cases, and even in the midst of all of that, I want to convey my my delight in seeing you all today, and I'll spend the next hour or so to discuss the topic assigned to me, and hopefully we'll have enough time towards the end. So if you have time, if you have questions along the way, write them down, and I'll make it my goal to allocate time towards the end so we can all have a fruitful exchange, and hopefully I'll be able to answer your questions as well. So it's always good to start with the definition. So if you look at the topic today, archipelagic state, so there appears to be two components to that topic. So the archipelagic part or archipelago, and then the state part. And if you look at the legal or juridical definition of the archipelago, which we'll look at very shortly, I mean, that's pretty settled. But if you look at the other component of it, I mean, the state part is also settled. If you look at the requirements of a state. But I just want to commence this lecture with, a thought-provoking question of what do you think is an archipelago? So what is an archipelago? What images do you imagine in your heads when you think of the word archipelago? And perhaps you might think of white sandy beaches. A lot of you might be from Indonesia or Malaysia or the Philippines. You can think of a huge collection or expanse of sea studded with islands, or a group of islands started at sea. Or perhaps you might think of some countries which come to mind instantaneously, like Indonesia, for example, or the Philippines, or perhaps some of the Pacific Island states, Fiji perhaps. If you look at the word archipelago, the word archipelago actually comes from the medieval Italian word archi, which means chief or principal, and the Greek word pelagos, which means gulf, pool, or pond. So the ancient Greek name of the Aegean Sea is actually archipelago, and it was later applied to the islands that it contains, and now it's used generally to refer to any group of islands. As I said, the legal and juridical definition of an archipelago can be found in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, which we'll look at there shortly. It is defined in Article 46, more specifically. And if you're wondering why is it important to define what is an archipelago or an archipelagic state, it's because if you look at Article 47, I'm going ahead of myself here, you will find out that only an archipelagic state can draw archipelagic baselines. So hopefully you don't get overwhelmed at this stage, because we will look at these concepts very shortly. So part of the lecture actually is sort of a short crash course in the law of the sea. So we will be looking at particular concepts and ideas which, considering it your building blocks of understanding the topic assigned to me today. So if you look at the dictionary definition of archipelago, it actually means any sea or sheet of water of which there are many islands. Some scholars say it's actually like a sea studded with islands, or studded or an expanse of water studded with islands, or a group of islands. So this definition emphasizes the sea component as well as the island component, or the land component. And you have some very beautiful pictures on the screen, which will hopefully evoke to you, images of what an archipelago is. I think if I'm not mistaken, the first one is from Indonesia, and the middle one is from the Philippines, and the third one is somewhere in the Pacific. So of course, it is a source of pride for Indonesians and Filipinos alike that the archipelagic concept, archipelagic doctrine, archipelago as a legal and juridical concept comes from this part of the globe. It was codified through the efforts of the Philippines, Indonesia, Fiji, and other similar countries during a very tumultuous period in our history in the aftermath of Second World War, post-decolonization. You have on your screen a figure, a map drawn in 1958, I believe. It's attached to a correspondence sent by Indonesia quite boldly at this stage in their history to encapsulate or depict the what it has called the Wawasan Nusantara doctrine, or the archipelagic outlook. One of the books I was reading entitled Sovereignty in the Sea, How Indonesia Became an Archipelagic State, written by John Butcher and R.E. Elson on page 114, said that this was the first official portrayal of Indonesia as a single entity rather than a collection of islands separated by high seas. It made Indonesia whole. So allow me to read the excerpt of the, this is actually part of the Juanda Declaration of 1957. So it says, the whole national territory with all of its contents and resources shall form one territorial unity. And I bolded that intentionally. One territorial integrity, container, sphere of life, and the unity and form of norms of the whole of the nation, as well as becoming the asset and property of the collective nation. So it's very, very eloquently put. So even in 1957, they had this conception that Indonesia is an integral whole, a territorial unity. We will soon see it's a unity of island, people, and sea. And all that is contained therein is actually integrated as a nation. So you might think at this stage, when you, especially I'm sure a lot of you are young ones, the archipelago, the archaeological concept, the archaeological doctrine, archaeological baselines, archaeological state, they seem very, familiar to your ear, but during this time, you should appreciate it was something that was very groundbreaking. It was something that they had to fight for. It was something that was heavily resisted by the major maritime powers. So it was really, in many ways, a symbolic victory. And indeed, the product of the great work, effort, blood, sweat, and tears of these heroes. So I'm actually attending an ILA Indonesia conference. I think 2 weeks from now, and they're celebrating these people, Mokhtar and Pak Hashim, and all of these Indonesians who were trailblazers and thought leaders, and they quite boldly advocated for this Wawasan Nusantara, the unity of the waters and islands and people of Indonesia. So this Indonesia, along the same lines, and within that same period, there was also other similar voices in the region. And you have on your screen a map of the Philippines depicted by depicting the treaty limits enclosed in those infamous lines, and an articulation of the Philippine version of Wawasan Nusantara. So this is actually a statement by the head of the Philippine delegation to the Convention on Global Sea 1958, former Senator Arturo Tolentino. And he said, all waters around, between, and connecting the different islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago, irrespective of their width or dimension, are necessary appurtenances of its land and territory, forming an integral part of the national or inland waters, and they're subject to the exclusive sovereignty of the Philippines. So again, you see an echo of the same element. So it's a unity of land and water, that all the waters that are part of that territory, whether they're small or big or wide in dimension, are part of the inland or national waters of the Philippines. You can notice there's a bit of terminological discrepancy here, because at that time the convention hasn't been fully negotiated. They were still grappling with the concept of the territorial sea, the width of the territorial sea. So some of the terminology are a bit misaligned, but you get the idea. So they were asking for a recognition of this unity of land, water, and in one of the speeches that Senator Tolentino said that they're asking for the diplomatic community to recognize the integrity of the Philippine archipelago, because to do otherwise would be to dismember the Philippine archipelago. So what does it mean? So it means that if you actually, at that time, international customary law, as well as state practice, only allowed for islands to be enclosed by a belt of water, which they call territorial sea. So he is basically arguing, if you enclose the islands of the archipelago, all 7,000 islands of the archipelago in the case of the Philippines, 13,000 for Indonesia, you will have pockets of high seas. So what does this mean? It means that states, maritime states specifically, will traverse, and that's a very serious security concern for these countries. So they're advocating for a recognition of the unity of their polity, and that every water enclosed by that territory should be considered internal at this stage. You will find out they will become archipelagic at a later stage. Moving on forward, after, as I said, the tumultuous and very exciting period of negotiation in the convention, in 1982 they managed to secure this victory. So it's qualified in the convention, and we have here on your screen a map of Fiji. You can see all the small islands. For those who have come to Fiji, it's a very beautiful archipelago in the Pacific. And a statement from Ambassador Satyananda, one of the four runners of this concept as well, from Fiji, and he said in 1982 when they signed the convention, we in Fiji have always looked upon the seas between our islands as uniting our nation rather than dividing it. So again, you can see the conceptualization, the coming together, the recognition, and the symbolic victory that they managed to secure. And they were saying after all these years, we never saw ourselves as disparate, as dismembered, but rather a unity of land, water, and people. So today, as we look at this concept of archaeological state, I'm sure some of you might have been exposed to similar, lectures and trainings. I myself am trained and work as a lawyer, and sometimes I have a bias towards the legal. But today, when I read the invitation by Dr. Andy Arsana and Associate Professor Hasbi Rusby, with the theme of the summer school being reimagining or rethinking borders, I thought it might be good to, widen our horizon, expand our thinking, and really, interrogate the concept of archipelago more than the legal side. Of course, the bulk of this lecture will be on the Law of the Sea Convention and particular provisions of the convention. But I'm inviting you to think of the word archipelago, and I intentionally put this word here, imagination, with the nation in bold. And as I said, if anything, you should remember the archipelago or the archipelagic state as a unity of people, land, and sea. So archipelago is actually a very rich, words. It's ancient in origin. It carries weight in terms of discourse and history. And I want you to think of the word archipelago as a word which is not innocent. It's a political fiction, a legal fiction, and it is also a collective identity. So you can imagine, for example, in my case, I identify as well, although I'm already been outside of the country for over 15 years. I'm part of a shared diaspora. I'm part of of the settlement of Filipinos living overseas, and part still of the Philippine archipelago, the polity, the nation building component of archipelago. So when you think of archipelago, I want you to also appreciate this. It's not just the legal, the juridical, but also the epistemological, if I may say, the ontological aspects of it, the sociological, anthropological aspects of the word archipelago. So you have here, maps of your archipelagic countries. I think the first one is the Bahamas, and then you have, of course, your beloved country, Indonesia, the Philippines, and then all of these images of of people, of culture, of shared history. So these are all part of the archipelagic state concept. And in fact, if you look at the history of how we came about this concept, you can appreciate, as I said, the symbolic victory, because I remember my former boss in the Philippines, she said when she was doing research on the Law of the Sea, particularly the archipelagic concept, she almost broke into tears. I think she was saying she actually cried, because you can almost imagine, the all the emotions, the difficulties they had to go through, the massive opposition from the maritime states, and this spanned for decades. They had to fight for this. And you can imagine, it was the aftermath of World War II, a period of rapid decolonization. So countries in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, the Philippines, they were just coming out of, their colonial masters' rule, and then becoming independent and trying to not just gain independence on paper, but really unify their countries. And out of this bigger movement, the decolonization movement, is taking place elsewhere in the globe. So that's why when they went to the conferences, they brought this very distinct third world flavor with them. And then they were member of a very robust group called the Group of 77. So they had this very strong voice espousing for a new international economic order, and in fact, they want all of this against heavy odds against their favor. I wish I had the time to discuss the Law of the Sea Convention, which is really my my training and my bread and butter, but I will allow you glimpses, as I said, of some concepts, some articles even that we will look at, being mindful not to be too legalistic in focus. So I just flagged there a couple of points about the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So as I said, and a picture of the convention itself. It's text, and it's also available online. So if you look at the question of the archipelagos or islands, it has been something that has preoccupied, scholars and diplomats over the course of the early 20th century. So they have discussed it during the Hague Codification Conference. They also had glimpses of it in the United Nations Conference on the Sea, the first one, but they were never able to really comprehensively discuss, answer, and specify, the components or elements of the archipelagic state doctrine. But fast forward, as I said, cutting to the chase, they were able to put this in eventually in part 4 of the convention. So the convention itself has 320 articles, 9 annexes. It's been called as the Constitution for the Oceans. So it's a comprehensive regime that governs, ocean activity, ocean uses and resources. It was negotiated over a span of over 14 years, and even some years before that, they already had prior conventions that covered the law of the sea. It was opened for signature on the 10th of December 1982 in Montego Bay, Jamaica, and after the 60th ratification by Guyana, it entered into force on the 16th of November 1994. So this is a breathtaking convention or treaty. It's almost universally adhered to. Almost all of the countries are signatories or state parties to the treaty, and a lot of the provisions of the convention have actually melded or entered into the corpus of customary international law. So they, at the time it was codified, it was also able to codify or crystallize some norms. And over the years, because of widespread state practice, some of the provisions have also been are recognized as customary international law, the EEZ regime, archipelagic state status, and so on. So that would be sufficient for our purposes. This is a cross-section of your ocean. So when people think of the Law of the Sea Convention, the first thing that usually comes to mind is the maritime zones. That's understandable. So even a lay person would have heard possibly of the maritime zone. So you would be familiar of the territorial sea, the EEZ, and so on. So this is a cross-section of your ocean and land territory. Actually, incidentally, this is actually an animation prepared by Dr. Andy Arsana. So that is your continental landmass. And the blue part is your sea or sea level or the water column. And then you have your territorial sea baseline. Suffice it to say that there are different kinds of baselines under the Law of the Sea Convention: normal baseline, straight baselines, archipelagic baselines. For our purposes, it suffices to say that all the maritime zones are measured from the baseline. So from the baseline, you measure 12, get your territorial sea, and so on. But landward of the baseline will be your internal waters. So what are internal waters? Your ports, your estuaries, your rivers. These are bodies of water which the state has full sovereignty. You can do whatever you want. You can enforce your laws, criminal and civil. You can arrest people. You can do whatever you please. It's similar to your land territory. And then from the baseline, you measure 12 nautical miles to get to your territorial sea. You have full sovereignty over the territorial sea during the airspace. We will soon have a slide what I mean by sovereignty for those who are curious and who might not be aware of what I mean when I say sovereignty. From the same baseline, we measure 12 nautical miles or 24 nautical miles from the baseline. You get your contiguous zone. So the contiguous zone is a maritime zone of limited jurisdiction. So you have your fiscal, immigration, sanitary, customs jurisdiction within the zone. And then from the same baseline, you measure 200 nautical miles, and that will be your exclusive economic zone, which applies to both the water column and the subset and subdet and sea soil and the soil of the continental landmass, except for those which are permanently attached. And you have sovereign rights over the resources therein, whether this could be hydrocarbon, this could be oil, this could be energy in terms of tidal waves and so on. So you have fisheries, the most important. You have sovereign rights over the natural resources in that zone. And then from the same baseline, you measure your 250 nautical miles, and in some instances, further than that, your continental shelf, which applies to the seabed, the subsoil, and the sedentary species, the species which are, at the harvestable stage, lobsters and so on, attached to the floor of the sea, of the ocean. And as I said, Article 76 of the Sea Convention provides for certain geomorphological criteria, sediment thickness, and so on, the ISOBAT rules, and so on, where a coastal state can have an extended continental shelf. And as you know, the convention created a body called the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, UNCLCS, where states submit their extended continental shelf claims. And then the water column will be high seas, and then beyond that will be called what we call the area. Okay, so keep this in mind. This is just as I said, apologies, a very crash course on the maritime zones. We'll revisit some of this along the way in today's lecture. So as I said, sovereignty, what do you mean by sovereignty? So the convention specifies in Article 2 that the coastal state has sovereignty beyond its land territory. So of course, in your land territory, over Surabaya or Manila or over Kuala Lumpur, you have full sovereignty. But the waters within 12 nautical miles from your baseline, from which your territorial sea extends, you also have full sovereignty over that. And in the case of archipelagic state, over archipelagic waters, to the archipelagic waters, the state will have sovereignty as well, with some qualifications we'll soon see in a while. So sovereignty, in this sense, covers full prescriptive sovereignty, and which means you have civil jurisdiction, you have criminal jurisdiction, you can enforce your laws, and you can arrest people, and so on, and this with some limitations provided for under international law. And this sovereignty extends not just to the water column, but even to the airspace and to the subsoil and the seabed, which means you can regulate air traffic, you can regulate vessels coming into your port, you can arrest people suspected of doing drugs or interfering with your criminal laws and so on. So what are the functions of the zones of jurisdiction? They establish the outer limits of states. So as we know, states are defined under international law, and part of that would be having a definite territory. So the maritime zones establish the limits of state, and it defines the competence of states to enforce their laws against other states and their nationals. So within those maritime zones, within the wording or text of the Law of the Sea Convention, you would have particular rights conferred to you under the convention, and also rights conferred to the state, within the general corpus of international law. And it also defines the rights and duties of other states and the nationals within those specified areas. So it's a very orderly world where the rights, duties, privileges, immunities even are defined. And within those particularly defined rights, duties, obligations, immunities, and so on, they apply within the zone as specified and granted under the Law of the Sea Convention or in other international law. So what do you need to consider when you look at the zones? So now you know that there's a territorial sea, contiguous zone, EEZ, continental shelf. They're defined within particular meets or limits in terms of nautical miles within a distance criterion. So when you look at the zones, you need to consider the powers that coastal states over the foreign vessels and the nationals, which means if you are, for instance, an enforcement agency from Indonesia, and you find a vessel in your territorial sea or EEZ or continental shelf or contiguous zone, you should be able to appreciate what powers do you have over the vessel, over the nationals of the vessel, over the cargo or vessels or nationals of other states. So these are clearly defined as well. So you can consider the rights of foreign states and their nationals in the various maritime zones, as well as the rights of the international community as a whole, which is basically navigational rights. So if you listen to Dr. Hasmi's presentation yesterday, we have this enduring tension between the maritime states who have always advocated for freedom of navigation, complete freedom of navigation. The seas are inappropriable, they're free for all, as opposed to the rights of the coastal states. Of course, as a coastal state, we would want to limit as much as possible the rights of navigation, or protective right or belt of water or sea to protect your coast. That's why you have rules that correspond to the cannon shot, which allows you that perimeter of protection as a state. So this is an enduring tension, which we still see at the moment in the Law of the Sea Convention and state practice. So how does the Law of the Sea Convention categorize the different zones? So for simplicity, you can think of the zones as being categorized into three. So there are zones which are subject to the sovereignty of states. There are zones which are subject to the sovereign rights of states. So these are actually very, I should say, fine distinction, but they have a legal significance. So sovereignty, as we understand, confers with prescriptive, criminal, and civil jurisdiction. Sovereign rights is a term of art which is a little less than sovereignty, and it's only for a particular purpose. So when you see the text of the convention and you encounter sovereign rights, you should always ask yourself to what the sovereign rights apply to, because they are only for a particular purpose. Okay, so they're specifically defined under the text of the convention. In some scholarship, you can think of this as a sui generis regime, which means only the powers, rights, duties which are specified therein is what would be available. So if it's not textually given there, you can argue that they're not granted because they're sui generis regimes, only specially devised or created by fiction, and only the particular powers or rights or duties which are conferred there will be available. So that's why if you look at the EEZ regime, you can look at the list of things which are the coastal states can do there. If you look at part 4 for archipelagic states, you can be sure that you will find there the things which the archipelagic state can do, which are specified in the convention. So the sovereignty states, zones under sovereignty, zones under sovereign rights, we'll soon see which these ones are. And then finally, the zones which are not subject to sovereignty. It's a free-for-all, is for the entire community of nations. So basic principles, so to further simplify the rule, imagine yourself standing at your shore. So the closer you are in your land territory or your shore, the stronger your powers are as a coastal state. So if you're standing in your port, for instance, or in your land territory, you could do whatever you please there. And then conversely, the farther you move away from the land, then of course, naturally, the weaker your powers would be. And then of course, the powers of the community of nations, the other maritime states, would increase as well. So that's why you can see from your full sovereignty in your territorial sea to less sovereignty in your EEZ, and then almost completely no powers over the high seas and the area, because these are all reserved for peaceful purposes for the entire community of nations. You cannot hamper freedom of navigation and overflight and even fishing. All of these things have been particularly reserved for the other maritime states. So what are the zones we're talking about? I apologize. We'll get to the archipelagic state very soon. Hopefully, as I said, these are building blocks which will help you understand the concept we will be discussing soon. So the sovereign zones within the sovereignty of coastal state, you have your internal waters, your ports, estuaries, rivers, your archipelagic waters. So we'll soon find out what archipelagic waters are. These are the waters enclosed by your archipelagic baselines. Okay, so for other coastal states, when you have baselines, the waters inside the baselines are called internal waters. But for archipelagic states, the waters that you enclose within your baselines, which are archipelagic baselines, are called archipelagic waters. And within those waters, you have full sovereignty. And then you have your territorial sea, straits used for international navigation, your contiguous zone. And then the second category, zones under the sovereign rights of coastal state, your EEZ, your continental shelf, and the zones which are not subject to your sovereignty or sovereign rights, the high seas, where there's freedom of navigation and fishing, and the area. So this is the area with a capital A, otherwise known as the deep seabed, which is reserved as a common heritage of mankind, and has within the jurisdiction of the International Seabed Authority. Again, just another picture of your maritime zones. So you can see, if you Google maritime zones in your browser, you can find lots of depiction of this maritime zone. So your territorial sea, your contiguous zone, your EEZ, your high seas, and then beyond that, the area. So finally, we move to the maritime zone. So now hopefully that gives you a roadmap, a template in your head to place where we're at. So the Law of the Sea is 220 articles, 9 annexes. Part 4 is on archaeological states. So we're only looking at that. But don't forget the other parts. They all constitute the whole. Because if you are not aware, that the Law of the Sea Convention was negotiated and conceptualized as a package deal. So everything has to go together. And when the state parties ratify and accede, they have to agree to the whole agreement. It's a package deal. So they have to not just choose archaeological state status, but ignore the other ones. It has to accede to all of this. So we move to this very important maritime zone. As you now know, it's a zone within the sovereignty of coastal states. And it's one which is closest to our hearts. I'm speaking here as a Filipino and Indonesian in that regard. So when we think of the contribution of Indonesia and the Philippines in the Law of the Sea conference and convention, there can only be one sure answer, and this is the archipelagic state regime. So as I said, this particular honor is shared by the Philippines, Indonesia, Fiji, Bahamas, and Papua New Guinea, who were really the front runners in the negotiating tables during that time. So you'll find out very soon that there are actually about 22 states which have claimed archipelagic state status. And we will look at some of these countries in some bit of detail in the slides to follow. So another concept which you might have encountered in other contexts is the word island. So Article 121, paragraph 3 of the convention defines what an island is. So we don't have time to discuss that today, but for our purposes, you're looking at your screen. So we know that an island, as I've hinted at the start of the lecture, they can generate a territorial sea. So if you have an island, which you see on your screen, the gray area, which is the belt of water surrounding that landmass, is what you call a territorial sea. So everything else beyond that, especially in the period in the 1930s and 50s when they were negotiating the convention, these are called the high seas. So the high seas is very important for maritime, especially the United States, the UK, and so on, because it's important for purposes of navigation. They don't want hampered. They don't want hampered navigation because this is important for the trade, important for the power projection, and so on. So why is this bad for the Philippines and Indonesia? Because if you have this configuration, then this is what Senator Tolentino was saying as a dismemberment of the archipelago, because there will be pockets of high seas in between, for example, Sibuyan or Java and the other islands. So there will be opportunities or water where the foreign states can pass through without any restriction. And of course, this poses very serious security issues to the coastal state or the archipelagic state. So this is where they were at the time that they were negotiating or fighting for the archipelagic state doctrine. And you can understand why they would want a unity recognized as well as a restriction on the rights that foreign states would have over those waters. As I said, because of security reasons, plus also for resource reasons. Imagine if you are passing through these waters, it's not hard to imagine how they can scoop the resources, their fisheries, for instance, damage the environment. So there are a lot of security issues other than the territorial integrity part. Okay, so what are the competing interests that were at play? So for Archipelagic state, as I hinted, of course, security, the resources, fisheries, other resources is also for environmental protection. On the part of the maritime state, is about the protection of their fishing rights. A lot of these are also distant water fishing nations who've been fishing long before the Law of the Sea Convention was negotiated. Navigation for purposes of trade. So you can imagine the sea lanes in the regions of Southeast Asia, the Philippines and Indonesia are important trading routes for the powerhouse, the economic powerhouses of Japan and Korea. It also carries the trade to the Middle East. It's also an important area for telecommunications. So there are very important submarine cables that fly these waters. Fisheries is also very important. So that's why the debate is not purely academic. You can imagine that, as I said, it's symbolic for Indonesia, the Philippines, Fiji, Bahamas, Papua New Guinea. But for the other states, it was also not just something that they opposed just because they're not supportive of the Group of 77. They had very real interests that they wanted to protect as well. And I remember some Indonesian diplomats saying that this was really, there was a quid pro quo involved. There were, there were compromises. And if you look at the negotiating history, especially on the part of the Philippines, they were asking for some things which were not embodied in the text of the convention itself. And then there were other compromises. So you see this very delicate balancing happening. So they were happy to recognize a project state status, but as a compromise, then you have sea lanes passage and so on, which will go very, very shortly. So you see this competing interest, again, quite reminiscent of the debates, even in the genesis of the Law of the Sea Convention itself. So the tension between mare clausum, and the freedom of navigation and so on. So as I said, the definition, the legal and juridical definition of the archipelago or archipelagic state can be found in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So you find that in Article 46, which I flagged on the screen. It's a group of islands, interconnecting waters, and other features so closely interrelated, that they form an intrinsic geographic, economic, and political entity, or have historically been regarded as such. So you can find here a lot of elements. I'll soon flag to you the criteria according to a scholar that has examined this article. So it is clear that the archipelagic state consists wholly of one or more archipelago, but they can include islands. So as I say, why is it important to define or know what an archipelagic state is? Because if you look at Article 47, only an archipelagic state can draw archipelagic baselines. And this is very important. So you might be wondering, for instance, China's archipelagic baselines in the South China Sea, that should not be allowed because it's not a archipelagic state. So anyway, that's a separate lecture altogether. So it's important that you meet the requirements of Article 46, because if you don't meet the requirements of being an archipelagic state, you will not be able to draw archipelagic baselines. And of course, all the others, rights, duties, obligations that flow from being, for having that status. So there are a number of things that we should note in this definition. First, archipelagic states do not include mainland states which possess non-coastal archipelagos. What do I mean with this? For example, you find Denmark, which has the Faroes, you have Ecuador, with the Galapagos Islands, you have Norway, which has Svalbard, Portugal, Spain. these are states which cannot draw archaeologic baselines because they're not justifiable under the convention. Okay, so because the archaeologic states do not include mainland states which do not possess non-coastal archipelagos. And then secondly, if you look at the definition of archaeologic state, it appears that it embraces a number of states which do not normally consider themselves to be archaeologic states. So if you look at the definition, you might be thinking of some states which, hang on a minute, these states could possibly be archipelagic states, but why are they not claiming archipelagic status? Because they have islands, right? So, for example, within the vicinity of the Asia Pacific, you might think, what about Japan? Japan has 6,800 islands, about 430 are inhabited, and you know, Japan is actually the largest island in East Asia and the fourth largest island country in the world. And you have other big islands, Hokkaido, Honshu, Kyushu, but it's not declared archaeological state status. Okay, so we'll find out why. So you could be thinking of some countries or states which have archipelagos or islands, like Japan, as I said, but how come they're not archaeologic states? What about New Zealand? It has many islands as well. It's estimated to have 600 islands. The two largest islands, South Island, is actually the 12th largest island in the world. It's even bigger than Luzon, which is the biggest island in the Philippines. What about New Zealand? We'll soon find out why. And what about the UK? It has thousands of islands as well. Okay, so these are countries or states which have a number of islands. So you might be wondering, why they're not islands? Because states have the option to declare themselves as archipelagic states. So if you look at Article 47, it says an archipelagic state may draw state archipelagic base. So it's actually permissive. So commentators say there are actually about 25 to 35 states which may fall within the definition of archipelagic states, but only 22 have declared themselves to be of that status. So it means the convention and international allows a state, for whatever reason, for strategic reasons and for whatever other reasons it may deem within its sovereign prerogative, to declare itself as archipelagic or not. So that's why you have Japan, or sometimes because they do not meet the stringent criteria of Article 47. We'll look at this later on, I think in the next couple of slides. There are also very specific technical requirements. For example, New Zealand, as I said, it has islands, but it has more land than water. And then some of these are too offshore. There are requirements for the baseline lengths and so on. Because it does not meet those stringent requirements, it cannot be an archipelagic state. Okay, a scholar by the name of Yoshifumi Tanaka, you might be familiar with him, said in his book, The International Law of the Sea, on page 109, that there are actually 4 criteria in order to meet the definition of what is an archipelago. So very clear. Number 1, existence of a group of islands. So you cannot be an archipelago if just one island. You have to be a group of islands. It has to be compact or adjacent. I'll explain why when we look at Article 47. So they have to be sort of compact because there are land to water ratio which need to be met, and maximum baseline distances that need to be met. And it has to be geographically, economically, and politically integrated as a whole. Okay, so again, this is a bit contentious, possibly. And then lastly, historical practice. So if you look at this criteria, I would argue, and even Professor Tanaka admits that they're not necessarily unambiguous. So you can distill them from Article 46. You can think of countries which meet the criteria, but they're not really, foolproof criteria. For example, it doesn't say the number of islands. How many islands do you need to be an archipelago? It doesn't give you the extent of the area that the studied sea should be. The test of historicity can also be problematic because even if you look at the Philippines or even Indonesia and other countries, some of them have not really been historically unified as one, because there are some areas which were not colonized and so on. So even the historical unity could be problematic. But leave that as it may. These are very significant or important points that you can look for when you define an archipelago. So a typical depiction of an archipelagic state. So you find there a group of islands that form a single unit. So the islands in the waters within the baselines. So if you look at this drawing, the waters within the baselines are internal waters. So these are all islands, the yellow figures. And then these lines are archipelagic baselines. So within the waters that you enclose would be your archipelagic waters, where the archipelagic has full sovereignty. And from the baseline, you measure 12 nautical miles, you will have your territorial sea. This is why it's a bit of an oddity compared to normal coastal states. But for archipelagic states, you will still have closing lines. And within those closing lines will be your internal water. So, and then there's a hint of one of the requirements I mentioned, a ratio of land to water between 1:1 and 1:9. We'll look at that very, very shortly. Okay, so archipelagic state, again, another depiction. So you can see the archipelagic state will have a full suite of the maritime zones. So you have your internal waters within the closing lines, you have your territorial sea, you have your EEZ and continental shelf. And for some archipelagic states, if you meet Article 76, you can have an extended continental shelf, like what the Philippines has over Benham Rice or Philippine Rice region. So Article 49, what is the status of the waters enclosed by the archipelagic baselines? They're called archipelagic waters. And within these waters, Article 49 states that the coastal state or archipelagic state has full sovereignty subject to international obligations. This sovereignty extends to the airspace as well as to the water. Bear in mind that these are not internal waters because, as I said, for coastal states, within baselines will be your internal waters, but for archipelagic states, the waters within the baselines, the archipelagic baselines are archipelagic waters. Okay, so if you look at Article 50, internal waters would be the waters enclosed by drawing closing lines. And these are all subject to the rules of baselines in Articles 9 to 11. So this is what I hinted at earlier, that it is a sui generis regime. So all the rights that the archipelagic state has would be the ones specified in Part 4 of the convention. Okay, so we will look at some of these compromises very shortly. So Article 47 gives you archipelagic baselines. So Article 47 provides that an archipelagic state may draw straight archipelagic baselines joining the outermost point of the outermost islands and drying reefs of the archipelago. So normally, if you have a normal baseline, you measure that from the low water mark. But for archipelagos, because you have a group of islands, you find the outermost islands and drying reefs, and that's where you draw your archipelagic baselines from. So you join the outermost points of the outermost islands and drying reefs. And again, what do you call the waters enclosed by those straight archipelagic baselines? Archipelagic waters. So the drawing of archipelagic baselines are subject to a number of conditions. So these are some of the conditions on the screen, two of which are precise and mathematical, and the remainder are more general and less precise. So what are these conditions? Number one, archipelagic baseline must be drawn that the ratio of land to water within the lines is not more than 1:1 and not less than 1:9. So you find this in Article 47, paragraph 1. So what is the purpose of this technical requirement? So the maximum ratio is 1:1, which prevents states which are predominantly one large island or a few large islands. You can think of Cuba, Madagascar, New Zealand, and the UK, and then drawing archipelagic baselines to enclose that. So you don't want that because you don't want states which are predominantly land to the archipelagic states. So the minimum ratio is 1:9. Why? Because you don't want also states or countries which are mostly water to draw archipelagic baselines and enclose them and enclose the waters as archipelagic waters. So And by way of illustration, Indonesia, of course, the Philippines and Indonesia being the forerunners of this idea, meet the criteria very neatly. So Indonesia is 1:1.2, the ratio of land to water, and the Philippines is 1:1.8. So they meet that requirement. Secondly, archaeological basin must not exceed 100 miles in length, except that these are very technical. Let me just go through them because it's part of the text of the convention. And if they're confusing, you can ask me during the open forum if there are any questions. So the baselines. So the baselines are the lines you draw from base points that the state chooses. They cannot exceed 100 miles in length, except for 3%, of the total number of lines can be between 100 and 125 miles in length. You find this in Article 47.2. How did they arrive at these limits? There are really no reasons. So these figures, unfortunately, are quite arbitrary, I might add, but they're quite specific and mathematical. So it's not difficult to test, baselines submitted to the UN DAOLOS to meet these criteria. And in fact, the former Philippine baselines law, failed in this regard, but the new one in 2009 actually specifically addressed this. So the way to go around the 3% rule, of course, just increase the number of baselines or base points. Number 3, the main islands of the archipelago must be included within the archipelagic baselines, Article 471. However, again, you find ambiguity here. What do you mean by main island? So some scholars say main island will be the island which is biggest, the one with the most population, or the one which is most strategic economically or politically. So the main island should be, so if you have baselines enclosing your archipelago, you have to include the main island in that baseline system. Number 4, straight baselines shall not be drawn to and from low tide elevations unless lighthouses or similar installations which are permanently above sea level have been built on them, or except in instances where the drawing of baselines to and from such elevations has received general international recognition, Article 47, Paragraph 4. Fifth requirement, the drawing of such baselines shall not depart to any appreciable extent from the general configuration of the archipelago, Article 47, Paragraph 3. So if you have the convention, you can read the convention text. So again, it's not very clear wordsmithing because you said this. They use the words general configuration of the archipelago. It's not easily ascertainable what they mean by that. So, but if you, for example, if you can imagine the Philippine archipelago, the Indonesian archipelago, they do follow the contours and sinuosities of the how the island chains are in the water. So you can interpret that paragraph as having that in mind. Number 6, the system of baseline shall not be applied by an archipelagic state in such a manner as to cut off from the high seas or the EEZ, the territorial sea of another state. Some commentators say this applied to Indonesia specifically in respect of the territorial sea of Singapore. So you cannot, the idea being, of course, out of comity or respect for your neighbors, you cannot enclose your waters so as to cut them off because the restriction would be inimical to your neighboring state. Number 7, the archipelagic state must clearly indicate in its archipelagic baseline system on charts of an aggregate scale or list the coordinates and must be given due publicity and deposited with the UN Secretary General. So if you look at the UN Division of Ocean in the Law of the Sea, UN DAOLOS website, you can find there the states which have deposited their domestic laws which specify the coordinates or the base points of their baseline. So they should be all publicly available. They should be of a sufficient detail and scale that you will be able to find them. So these are really, if you're from a mapping agency or if you're an engineer by training or your training is in geography, then these are very precise information we're looking at here, and they should be publicly available because other states should be able to say whether you comply with the land to water ratio, whether you comply with the bathymetric or other hydrological requirements. So they're open for scrutiny in that for transparency as well. Question: is it necessary for states to archaeological states to enclose all the islands making up that state in a single system of baseline? For example, you have 13,000 islands. Do you need to enclose every single island into one single unitary baseline system? For the Philippines, you have 7,000 islands. Do you have to have everything enclosed in one continuous system of baseline? And the answer to that is no. So Article 46 says that the archaeological state can consist of a number of archipelagos. For example, you can look at the Solomon Island or Mauritius, and archaeological state can have multiple systems of baseline. So you can have, we'll soon see this in some examples in the Pacific Islands we'll be looking at shortly. So you don't have to have them enclosed in one single continuous, unbroken system of baselines. You can have multiple sets of them. And in fact, some of them, I think Fiji has about 5. So we'll look at these examples very soon. Of the publicity. Another example of or depiction of your archaeologic baseline. There's another detail there which was not in the previous slide, the ceiling. So archaeologic ceiling, which we will look at shortly when we look at archaeologic ceiling passage. So your archaeologic state will be enclosed by archaeologic baseline. The waters inside will be archaeologic waters, your territorial sea, and then the maritime states would have the right to traverse from one part of the EEZ or high seas into the other by crossing into your archaeologic waters through your archaeologic baselines. What happens if there are no baselines designated, archaeologic ceilings designated through routes used for international navigation? We'll soon see that very shortly. So now you know the requirements of the requirements of archaeologic states. You now know what are the requirements of archaeologic baselines. You now know what rights the states has within those waters. You might be curious what countries have applied for or sought or claimed archaeologic state status. So this is a list. I think if you go to UN Dollar site or even in Wikipedia, you'll be able to see this. And the 5 in bold are actually the 5 original official archaeological states. So you have Bahamas, Fiji, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, and the rest are, you can see a whole suite of them, a lot from the Pacific. And so you have Kiribati, Maldives, Vanuatu, Tuvalu. These are lists of, I think, some of the most beautiful countries in the planet, if I may add, on a personal note. Fiji, so these are the, and as I said, Japan is not on the list. There are some countries which have islands which do not meet the criteria. New Zealand, for instance, or Greece, for example, because they're talking here of mid-ocean archipelagos, not continental archipelagos. China, as I said, is clearly not archipelagic state. So they might have offshore territories, but if they don't meet the strict requirement in 46 and 47, they cannot be an archipelagic state. A lot of these are actually within the region. So you have here Indonesia, the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, Kiribati. As I said, I put there as a trivia New Zealand. As I said, it's not an archipelagic state because it does not have enough water. And then there are also some, New Zealand has a lot of islands, and some of them are very tiny offshore islands. But if you draw the baselines, remember it's a maximum of 100 nautical miles, and 3% cannot be more than 125. They're too far away. If you do that, the waters you enclose will not meet the land to water ratio. What about New Caledonia? New Caledonia is also very beautiful. I've been there. Do you think it qualifies? So you can imagine New Caledonia being offshore. I mean, it's mid-ocean. It has lots of islands, water, and so on. Is it an archipelagic state? And the answer to that is actually a no, because New Caledonia is actually a French territory. And since France is not an archipelagic state, of course, neither can New Caledonia be. I think they've chosen to be part of the French of France. And I mentioned Greece as well, it's not there. China is no, and so on. So keep in mind the requirements in 46 and 47. And then the prerogative, the sovereign prerogative of states to choose to declare or claim archipelagic status. So just a map that illustrates some of the important archipelagic states within the region. And as I said earlier, you can understand how important and critical these states are. They're tiny states. I mean, not tiny states. They're tiny islands, but these are very important choke points. The top trading partners: China, Korea, Japan. The oil going to the Middle East and so on. These are all very important for fisheries, for biodiversity and so on. So this is not a joke. It's important for the archipelagic states, and also it's also important for the community of nations. The following maps are actually examples of archipelagic states. So I'll just breeze through them. But as I said, the convention requires imposes a requirement that charts be given due publicity. So if you can find these coordinates in the UN website, then you can actually plot them out. And some of them, they actually publish their own maps as well. So of course, clearly, without a doubt, the Philippines is an archipelagic state. So you have a single set of baselines defined by RA 9522, the Philippine Baselines Law of 2009, technically meet the requirements of an archipelago. There are other interesting lines there in the map. The Philippine Treaty Limits Box, which is part of my dissertation. I spent 5 years looking at this line. I think abandoned by the Philippines at this stage. You have some lines, a polygonal line enclosing the Philippine plain over the South China Sea or West Philippine Sea, and some other median lines drawn from the coastal states within the region. So if you look at the convention, there are also rules. I'll just mention very, very briefly that govern delimitation. We will not cover them, unfortunately, today. So median line or and so on. And of course, if you look at jurisprudence, you will also appreciate that there are also very set of rules, specifically after the Black Sea case of 2009, that sets the steps, how you delimit overlapping maritime jurisdictional zones. Another map of the Philippines. So now you will apply the things you've learned. The Philippines meets the criteria in Article 46. Article 47 is also met for archipelagic baselines. The waters enclosed will be archipelagic waters where there's innocent passage. We'll soon go to the passage regimes very shortly. And since the Philippines is not designated archipelagic sea lanes passage or sea lanes, then there will be innocent passage in routes used for international navigation. In the case of Indonesia, it's a bit different because Indonesia has designated partially its sea lanes. So this is a map of Vanuatu. It's an archipelagic state in the South Pacific, west of Fiji and northeast of New Caledonia. So if you look at the map, there's the archipelagic baseline of Vanuatu is composed of 59 line segments, and it ranges from 0.01 nautical mile to 96.57 nautical miles, so a little bit short of the 100 nautical mile limit. The archipelagic baseline system of Vanuatu meets the water to land ratio. It's in Article 47. It's 5.83:1. What else? If you look at the configuration, so this is what I'm talking about. If you look at the configuration of the baseline, it does not appear to be departing from any appreciable extent from the configuration of the archipelago. So this one is a bit subjective, but you can actually appreciate that it's not. It follows the contours of how nature and God put the islands there. So it follows that configuration. It does not draw baselines from low tide elevations, meeting Article 47.4, and there is no cutoff of the other neighboring countries. I would like to draw your attention to a publication by the Geography U.S. Department of State. So they published a regular publication called Limits of the Sea. So they actually analyze the baselines and the state practice in terms of the law of the sea of some countries, and this can be all publicly available. So if you have the time, the inclination, and the interest or curiosity, you can actually look at this. They're very interesting. So they They tell you if they meet the requirements, what are the problems, if there are, and so on. This is Fiji. So you can find here the Fiji archipelago. So it's almost like a circular configuration, and then some outlying islands. So again, now you can apply the appreciable extent, no departure from the appreciable extent rule. Does this apply? Does this conform to that? Maybe you can say yes, maybe no. So the government of Fiji distinguished the Fiji archipelago from the islands of Rotuma and its dependencies, and from the island of Seva Irai. So you can see some of them are actually outside. So these are all part of the Fiji archipelago, but some of them are not enclosed in the baseline. So this is what I'm talking about when I say, do you have to put them all together? If Fiji did that, then the waters enclosed by the baseline would be so much, it would not meet the land to water ratio. So there's a main or principal system of baselines including the main archipelago. Viti Levu is the biggest one where the capital is located. And then the other ones, they have their own baseline. So you can look at Article 9 to 11 or the other baseline rules. You can apply them to the other ones, and then that's fine. So you can have multiple systems of baselines, going on at the same time. Solomon Islands, another archipelago state in the Southwest Pacific Ocean, east of Papua New Guinea and north of Vanuatu and New Caledonia. Again, you can find here an application of the rule I mentioned. So you can have you don't have to have one singular continuous baseline system. In fact, here they have a couple of groups. So you have a couple of groups of baseline systems happening, and that's fine. So it's for you to decide whether they have departed from the appreciable extent of the general configuration of the archipelago. The U.S. Department of State that it complies with that, and so on. So very, very neat. So some of these are actually very technical in nature and also very costly. So I think there are a couple of funding agencies which help the Pacific Islands, generate this base points and baselines, and assist in also capacitating them in sitting in negotiations and so on. Okay, so again, another depiction of the Philippine archipelago. So let's go back to the archipelagic waters. So archipelagic waters are part of the sovereignty of the state. So these are the waters enclosed by the baselines. So there's a qualification that needs to be made. So since archipelagic baselines is new in international law, at that time it is really neither internal waters or territorial sea. It's actually, as I said, a sui generis regime which bear a resemblance to both. So within the archipelagic waters, there is a right of innocent passage, and there is within that right, the ships of all states enjoy innocent passage, and then within the waters, if the archipelagic state designates archipelagic sea lanes, then there will be ASLP or archipelagic sea lanes passage that will exist on those lanes. And if not, as I said, they will then normal routes for navigation can be used by the other states. So archipelagic sea lanes passage is defined in Article 53. It's available to both ship and aircraft. And archipelagic sea lane passage is defined as the rights of navigation and overflight in normal mode. So what do you mean by normal mode? So normal mode can apply to submarines. It can apply to shipborne aircraft. It means that they are able to do that submerged. That's why it's a very liberal regime, because they can pass through the maritime states are allowed innocent passage in the normal mode, and for submarines, of course, the normal mode of submarines is to navigate submerged. So they're able to do this. It has to be continuous, expeditious, unobstructed, and contrary to the innocent passage regime, it cannot be suspended. So it's quite serious, because these are very important sea lanes of communication in the interest of managing this delicate balance the convention provides that ASLP cannot be suspended. So it cannot, as opposed to innocent passage where you can have publicity or notification before suspension. For ASLP, you cannot do this. So a depiction of archipelagic sea lanes passage. So this is a drawing of your archipelagic state. The yellow land masses are your islands. The solid lines are your archipelagic straight archipelagic baselines. The waters will be archipelagic waters. The lines enclosed by the dotted lines would be your 12 nautical miles territorial sea where there's innocent passage. And there's also that innocent passage within archipelagic waters. But if you designate sea lanes, there will be archipelagic sea lanes passage. So it's defined by access lanes, at least 25 nautical miles, which becomes, smaller. There's a 10% rule. So if there could be islands in the corridor, which will limit the width of that corridor. So you can find that in the convention, but I won't spend too much time on that for our purposes today. So it's like a high seas corridor that allows the passage of vessels through the archipelagic waters. Okay. Archipelagic sealing must be undertaken on a lane. So these are, of course, designated by the coastal state, and they have to use routes used for normal navigation if there are no designated lane. For example, in the Philippines, of course, the ships, because of issues of cost, will pass through the shortest possible route, right? But if the archipelagic state designates sea lanes, then they would have to pass through that designated lane. And if there's no designated lane, then the ships can just pass through normal routes used for international navigation. If they're designated lanes, then they have to be approved by the competent international organization, which in this case is the International Maritime Organization, of course, in consultation with the archipelagic state. What are the possible concerns? Overflight could be one concern. These are some of the technical requirements. So they have to be exercised within defined lanes by an access line. They have to be within 25 nautical miles on either side of the access line. The next slide will give you a graphical depiction of this. And the 10% rule applies if there are islands in the lane. So as I said, the corridor is 25 nautical miles from the access lane in the middle. But if there are islands, it will be reduced by 10% for the purpose of protecting the security of the island. Of course, if you're too close to the island, there's a danger that you might, cause ecological damage, environmental harm, and so on. So the passage is guaranteed, but you have to respect if there, by some misfortune of geography, there are islands that traverse the access lane. Some of these are very theoretical. They're in the convention itself, but at the moment we only have the state practice of Indonesia to apply this rule. And speaking of Indonesia, so Indonesia is the first and to date the only archipelagic state to designate ASLs. Some of you in the crowd might know this more than I do. So Indonesia submitted this proposal to the IMO in 1996. It worked closely with the US, Australia, and other user states in formulating 3 north to south ASL. So you can find that on the screen. There are 3 north to south ASL. Because the key routes in the East-West passage were not included. This is actually entirely consistent with Article 53. The Indonesia was mindful it was a partial designation all throughout the process. Then for the East to West passage, then they will have to use the normal routes used for international navigation. So in 1998, the IMO adopted this partial system of ASL in Indonesian waters, and Indonesia proclaimed the 3 north to south ASLs through a government regulation in 2002. So I think I will leave it at that. So these are partial. There are some problematic issues when it comes to Timor-Leste and so on. Plus, since it's not fully designated, some scholars and even user states argue that they can still use innocent passage to the rest of the archipelago. Okay, so as I said, the process is consultative in nature. You have to consult with the IMO and user states, and it's approved, but the designation is left with the archeological state itself, which Indonesia has done. We'll do some further maps. I think I'm down to my last 2 slides, so hopefully I still have your attention and your presence. So coastal state laws in archeological waters. So if you look at articles 39, 40, 42, 44, they apply mutatis mutandis to archeological sealings passage. What that means is that if you find these articles in the convention, then this international law rule means that you should apply the rules in a different context, in the context of part 4. So look at 39, 40, 42, 44. They're used in a different context, but they also apply in ASLP for archeologic states. What laws can the coastal state apply? They can apply or enforce or enact laws that pertain to the safety of navigation, pollution, fishing, including the storage of gear, fiscal engagement, sanitary and customs related laws. And they should respect the sovereign immunity of warships. And if there's a damage that occurs because of that, then that only gives rise to damages. This is my final slide. So just a few concluding thoughts. These are really not a summary, but some of the thoughts hopefully you would have gathered from this lecture. So as I said, archipelagic state or archipelagos, archipelagic regime, it's a very legal and juridical concept by nature. But I was challenging you in keeping with the theme of the summer school to reimagine borders. There have been more wars fought over borders than any other reason in all of human history. And the same for maritime jurisdictional boundaries as well. We can say the same. And thankfully, because of the violent efforts of the countries such as Indonesia, the Philippines, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and so on, during the tumultuous period of the negotiation, we can be proud that this archeologic regime was codified and recognizes the status of archipelagos. And because of their efforts, the states, which is composed of thousands of islands, they're not dismembered, that the unity of the land, sea, and water is recognized. And because of this, the interests of the archipelagic states are protected. Economic interests, security interests, environmental interests are protected. And always remember that it is a very special regime. It echoes, and at the undercurrent of the text is that it's a very delicate balancing act. So the archipelagic state might have won in securing textual legal recognition of the archipelagic state doctrine and regime, but there's also the other rights of the maritime states, which are also recognized: passage, specifically navigation, overflight, and so on, which also need to be ensured. So, and of course, there are challenges. It's a significant achievement by no means feat, but there are also very significant challenges. I mean, there's a legal unity, but you can imagine the practical and operational challenges. You have to have a unified system of laws and ports, transportation, communication, and other issues, and such huge expanses of water that need to be policed and so on. So, on balance, I think it's safe to say that it's a significant victory for the archipelagic states. The codification itself is no mean feat, which I've repeated over and over again, something that we can be proud about and proud of, and also a responsibility, because like the destination of archipelagic sealings, there are costs involved and also responsibilities involved. So we should all be looking at that when we look at this topic. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you so much. I'll stop sharing. I'll give the lecture PowerPoint slides to Dr. Arsana, and then you can copy them.
Yes.
And then I'll open the floor for any questions or from the floor.
Thank you.
Are you still alive? Are you?
Yes, yes, of course.
I'm happy to answer any question in there. I kept to my time, so I promised an hour and a half, and I did that. And Dr. Hasmi said there were a lot of questions yesterday, so I'm anticipating the same. I'll do my best to answer your questions, and if not, I'll have Andy to answer them for you. Vincent, are you moderating, or should I just take questions as they come?
Maybe I keep moderating and then waiting for the questions. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Lowell Bautista, for an insightful and splendid lecture. Maybe I can conclude several points from your lecture. First one is the concept of some archipelagic states, such as Indonesia, the Philippines, and Fiji, might differ based on how each country defines it. And then according to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, there are three things to note for defining the functions of zones of jurisdiction, which consists of the zone under sovereignty, sovereign rights, and not to subject to sovereignty or sovereign rights of states. And then the final one that I can conclude is the archipelagic states consists wholly of one or more archipelagos, but can include other islands. Okay, without waiting any longer, we will continue with the Q&A session. This session will last for about 25 minutes. For any participants who have questions for Dr. Bautista, you can write down your question in the chat box and I will read out your question, or you can raise your hand using the raise hand features from Zoom. And I will pick one of you who raise your hand, and please open your microphone. Thank you. Okay, I can see Eriska Ginalita raise your hand, and then please open your microphone and ask a question to Dr. Bautista. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity. Hello, Dr. Bautista. My name is Eriska and I'm a student. I have a question for you. As you said earlier in your presentations that archipelago is a unity of people, land, and the sea. Since that Philippines is an archipelagic state, just like Indonesia, so I want to ask, how does the Philippine government media or the Philippine respond the issue, environmental issue, such as marine pollution and marine debris, or land resources, for example. So because we have already know that archipelagic state know that it's potential for the natural resources, especially in maritime field. So I think we need some effort to protect our environment, especially in archipelagic state. I think questions. Thank you very much.
Maybe we'll answer the question first.
Okay. Thanks, Eriska. Thank you for that question. And thank you, Vincent, for your excellent summary and moderation. So I think there's a question. I'll answer Eriska's question, but I think there's a question in the chat box. It says, "Hi, Dr. Lowell and Nadia. I would like to ask about why Indonesia the only one that has the ASOP regime than the other Pacific states." Thank you. So it's a very good question because as I said, there are 25 to 35 potential archipelagic states. There are 22 which claim archipelagic state status. And lo and behold, there's only one archipelagic state which has archipelagic sea lanes, right? So, and what is that country? Only Indonesia. So why? I think, as I said, I want to clarify first. The first point I want to clarify is there's no if you meet the requirements for being archipelagic state, which means you have islands, you have waters, you need land to water ratio. There's no requirement for you to be an archipelagic state. So that's a sovereign prerogative. So second, and that applies to the other rights and obligations within Part 4, and that includes archipelagic sea lane designation. So if archipelagic state chooses not to designate, that's fine. If it chooses to, like what Indonesia did, that's also fine. So But what are the reasons why, for example, the Philippines? The Philippines at the moment, they're pending bills for the last 5 or so years, even longer, about ASLs, because we know where these ASLs are. So if you Google sealing passages, you can actually find the tracks of ships. Ships are very intelligent creatures. They would pass through the shortest possible route. That's why you can see, heavy ship movement in the same. They're very cost efficient enterprises. So the passage routes are known to the shipping industry. The designation is optional. Okay, so why would a postal state not designate? Because there are costs involved. You would have to have pilotage, you would have to have beacons, and you have to have other technological paraphernalia that ensure safety of navigation. So these are all close to the coastal state or to the archipelagic state. So that is one. Plus, as I said, these are not simple exercises. They require technical expertise. I know for a fact, Dr. Arsana has been involved with, Indonesia's, a lot of the geographical requirements of the law of the sea for Indonesia. For the Philippines, I think we have some capacity, but I can imagine it only to a limited extent. And you can imagine for the other Pacific states, Pacific Island countries, it's a huge financial burden on them to designate this, but they have to send their people to the IMO to negotiate. This could last for a couple of years. I don't know how much it costs Indonesia to do this, but I can assure you it's not cheap. So, and not only that, after the designation, if you look at the literature, it's been criticized. It's only partial. Because it's partial, we can just go through everywhere we want to. So it's almost like some scholars even say it's almost useless because they have partial designation and the other routes are still available. So all of these states are also very utility maximizing entities. So they want to balance the cost involved versus the utility of this designation. So that's why I think other states haven't done that, because maybe the states think there's too much cost, too much trouble involved with very little return. Okay, so, and then the other question by Eriska, thank you Eriska for that question. Very important, of course, marine environmental protection. As I said, these are not only important trade routes, these are also very important, these are ecologically sensitive areas. I'm thinking at the moment of the South China Sea because if you look at the South China Sea arbitration, they actually mentioned there that the activities of China cause irreparable damage to the environment. So it's very important because 10% of the world's fisheries actually come from this region, the South China Sea region, which is where all the other countries also fish. So which means if there's a grounding or there's a oil pollution or there's damage to the ecology, we are all affected because a major source of protein is fish. For Indonesia, the Philippines, and other little states in Southeast Asia, you can already surmise if there's an ecological damage within the region, then it will affect all of us. And it's very transboundary in nature. So if you look at the convention, there's also particular provisions that give you the duty to cooperate, the rules for the protection of the marine environment. There are now negotiations for BBNJ and so on. So these are at the forefront of climate change and so on. I haven't mentioned that, but it's also very important. When you look at archipelagos, some of these islands are sinking, some of these island states are in danger of actually being extinct. So there are a lot of other issues. I kept it to my topic, but as I said, challenge your mind to look at it from a broad perspective and also to look at other issues. The sociological, I haven't even scraped through the anthropological as well, the historical parts and so on. So I think the question was how does the Philippine media? I think my response would be there will be a lot of laws which apply to the protection of the marine environment across the Southeast Asian region, not just for the Philippines, but for Indonesia and Malaysia as well. So I don't know if that answers the question, Eriska. Okay, there's another question. Good presentation from you, Dr. However, I have a question about maritime zones on archipelago. I'm smiling because for some reason, because of my exposure and it always goes back to South China Sea. The participants are always obsessed with the South China Sea. The Spratly Islands consist of many maritime features, some of which are being contested by many countries. So my question is, could they establish a maritime zone over the island on the Spratly Islands based on their claim? Thank you. Very good question. So this is from Hadito Edra. So one important principle in international law and the law of the sea is that they operate on the premise of established land boundaries. So if you look at the convention, there are no rules there which will tell you who owns the islands, who owns the features. These are found in another corpus of international law. So if you look at the South China Sea arbitration, they only discuss about interpretation and application of the convention. They never talk about sovereignty. So all the maritime zones, you measure from established land boundaries. So the land dominates the sea. So if the land is not settled, then the maritime zones will not follow. So that's the principle. Okay. So, but the question is, can you apply or establish maritime zones over the island? Of course. If these are, so if, for example, if let's say Pag-asa Island or Calayan Island is the Philippines, and in a future adjudication, the court or tribunal or the parties agree it's the Philippines, then the island could generate the full suite. If it's an island, okay, if it's an island, it could generate the full suite of maritime zones, territorial sea, contiguous zone, EEZ. But unfortunately, the tribunal said that the requirements of an island, because an island is actually a legal and technical term in the convention. So if you look at Article 121, it has to be naturally formed, it has to be above water at high tide, it has to meet certain requirements. Human habitation, economic life of its own. So they all have to be met in the cumulative. All of them have to be ticked. If one of them are not ticked, for instance, in the South China Sea, the tribunal said these are not islands under Article 121. They can only have a territorial sea, and that's all that they can have. So it's a complicated question, but it's a good question because the maritime zones proceed from established land territories. If there are no land territories to speak of, then we cannot speak of maritime zones. Plus, we cannot speak of delimitation. So if you look at the Law of the Sea Convention, Article 15, 74, 83, there are rules for overlapping maritime jurisdictions. So if they're overlapping territorial sea, the median line, except if there's historic title, the equidistance time for EEZ and so on. Again, they have to proceed from established boundaries. Land territories. If they're not, you can't do that. So for my second question, in your presentation, you had mentioned about archeologic waters are different from internal waters. My question is, how actually do they differentiate the internal waters and archeologic waters in Arctic? From not get to, so the maritime, so how is archipelagic waters different from internal waters? Let me go first to the default. So the default coastal state would have the power to draw baselines. So there are a couple of baselines under the Law of the Sea, straight baselines, normal baselines, straight archeologic baselines. For a normal coastal state, the typical coastal state, you can draw it from the low water mark. And from the low water mark, you measure 12 to get your territorial sea. And then, as I said, everything inside the baseline will be your internal waters, your sea, your estuaries, your bays, your rivers, your lakes. So that's for the typical coastal state. But for the archipelagic states, you draw your baselines, Article 47, and inside that will be your archipelagic waters. There's innocent passage in archipelagic waters, but within your islands, for instance, the island of Java, for instance, there will be closing lines. And then inside those closing lines will be your internal waters. So it's quite different in that sense. And then the innocent passage that applies to archipelagic waters are not present in your internal waters, which means there's no navigational rights. You can prohibit any foreign vessel in your internal waters. So that's how they differ. Hopefully I'm not confusing you. These are very technical terms. Normally we spend like a whole, I don't know, I spent my whole lifetime learning this. But, and of course, Andy, I'm sure this is also basic stuff for Andy. But for you guys, hopefully, it's not causing you more confusion because it's quite technical in nature. Vincent, who has a who should we call next?
Okay. The next questions come from Mr. Sanders. Please open your microphone and ask the question.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. The international law regime right now, as you said in your presentation, is on archipelagic states relies heavily on demarcation and the limitation of territories. And it's these demarcations that serve to differentiate the rights of some peoples against others, right? Who could exploit, who could not, who could enter, etc. But the theme of the summer course is reimagining a borderless world. And we could take border to mean any barrier to entry or demarcation or delineation. So like, is the idea of a borderless world, not just in a virtual sense that we could travel through Zoom, but like in a more physical, political sense, is that incompatible with our current notion of archipelagic states under international law? And if it is, like, how could we, do you have any idea like how we could reimagine it?
I like Robert's question. Very philosophical, almost theoretical. So Robert is asking, so I'm now conflicted because normally I wear my Law of the Sea, which is very legal hat. And then sometimes when I'm tempted, I have very philosophical ruminations as well. So Robert is asking, how do we meld this two, this legal concept of, because you know, the beauty with the law is that it's majestic in its certainty, it's applicable, and it's supposed to be unbendable. So it's very positivist in tradition and nature, right? So, and that's the beauty of law, because that's the certainty makes it majestic in a way. But from another perspective, Robert is challenging our view because if you look at the criteria of statehood and international, it has to be defined under the Montevideo Convention. There has to be defined boundaries. So there's no lacuna in terms of the geographical scope. All laws apply to a particular defined, definable, and ascertainable spatial unit. But from a sociological perspective, look at the region. You look at the Sulu-Sulawesi area. You look at the Mindanao. It's very porous. You look at nature. Nature does not honor boundaries. The fish come where they please. Of course, the same with climate change. It affects all of us. The same with the weather. The same with all things natural. I mean, they don't respect the means and bounds and so on. So I like the question because it makes us think that way. Because for policymakers, for legislators, for lawyers, it's quite certain where Article 47 applies. I can tell you that. Where Article 5, 7, or 9 or 11 should be applied for baselines, or where there's innocent passage, where there's everything. I like it that way. But when you superimpose the people, when you superimpose pollution, like Elisa's question, it becomes problematic because everything else except for the law does not respect all of this, right? So that's why I like the theme, because it asks you to really imagine borders. And as I said, I hinted at in my closing, there are more wars fought over territory. We're so obsessed, and we're obsessed as people with the concept of the territory. This is very Westphalian in nature. When the nation states were formed, they had to have a spatial or geographical, application of where the laws apply. So when of course you can imagine in the parade of history, in the aftermath of the war, in the colonization and so on, they have been so obsessed with the territory. But in reality, I mean, I can already imagine Sabah, and we talk about ethnicity and we talk about other things. My goodness, I mean, it's almost senseless. I mean, it's almost useless, in fact, to speak of such things. Even when you talk of ceilings and such, I mean, they're on the ground. It's not as simple as that. So I have no short answer to Robert's question, but to challenge you to think along those lines, because even in I'm gone. Vince, are you still there? I might have lost you guys. Oh, sorry. I thought I lost you.
You're good. You're good.
I don't know if I lost you, but
you're still there.
yeah. Sorry for that long response. So I completely agree. It's a very challenging question. Plus, yeah, I embrace the theme for the summer school. So legal concepts are majestic and powerful constructs, but there are other there are other ways of looking at things. And if I may add, the same for the South China Sea or any other dispute. Sometimes we're so obsessed with the legal rules, Part 15 of the Law of the Sea Convention. I can give you a whole week's lecture on the South China Sea on the legal aspects, but there are other ways of looking at it, from geopolitics, from international relations, and so on. So only when you're able to embrace all of that your analysis becomes at least more or less complete, if not more comprehensive. Robert, I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, thank you for that. Robert says it's very difficult to reimagine something that we've been taught for years. Thanks, thank you as well. Any more questions?
Okay, dear participants, we are approaching the final minutes of the Q. We still have about 5 minutes. Maybe we can have 1 until 2 questions. Anyone that want to ask, please just open your microphone, or maybe you could ask from the chat box. Thank you. Or maybe Pak Andi, you want to have a question for Dr. Bautista?
I don't have any question because the explanation is very clear already. Thank you very much. So I just want to say thank you once again for this very insightful presentation, also lecture. I know that it is quite late now, probably in Sydney already. So thank you very much for spending your time with us. That's it. So just thank you very much. Really, really good. I think we can proceed. If you have any questions, Vincent, probably you can ask one more question. Probably you still have like 5 minutes.
And thank you for your kind words, Andy. Thank you to Eriska, Hadito. Sorry if I mispronounced your name, Nadiatu, and Joseph.
Right.
Salvador. So
Yeah.
I hope you learned something. My invitation is for you to, I don't know if you're in undergrad or postgrad, but continue studying. As Andy mentioned, I've been originally born, raised, bred in the Philippines, but I've been working overseas for the last 15 years. It's not been easy, I tell you, but if you're hardworking, and I want to inspire and encourage you all, pursue postgraduate studies. If there are opportunities to study abroad, I think Andy's office has been doing a good job linking you with foreign institutions. This summer school, I cannot tell you how fortunate you are. This is not there are thousands of universities in the region. You're so fortunate to have this. So I think on your behalf, I would like to thank Andy and asking for this initiative. Plus, I hope you're keeping safe because and looking after yourself. As I said in the initial start of my lecture, it's a very difficult time. Please stay safe and look after your mental health, and also I don't know, do you stay? We're actually under strict lockdown at the moment in Sydney. We cannot leave 5 kilometers out of our house. Starting tomorrow, we will have curfew as well, and the fines are so expensive. So if you're caught outside the 5-kilometer radius, you'll be fined $1,000. This is important. I don't know why I'm saying this, but my point is follow the regulations, stay safe, and hopefully the pandemic gives us perspective because there are more important things in life. And I just want to add as well, on a personal note, Andy is such a treasured and beloved friend, and hopefully we can continue more collaboration with Gajah Mada and Hasmi is also here.
Yeah.
Hasmi, I see your icon.
Safe drive, Hasmi. Safe drive.
Safe drive.
Thank you, man.
Okay.
All right. I think it's all good, Vincent.
Yes. Okay. I think.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you for participating in this lecture. What an inspiring discussion we had today with Dr. Bautista. I want to thank Dr. Bautista for your time today and for giving us an excellent insight of archipelagic states. Hopefully, this discussion we had today will be beneficial for all of us who participated in this lecture. Please give your biggest applause to Dr. Lowell Bautista.
Terima kasih banyak. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Finally, we are approaching the end of this lecture. Again, I want to thank you to all participants who have participated in this lecture. I am sorry if there is any wrongdoing both in my actions or my statements as a moderator. Thank you so much for being so attentive, and I will give the stage back to Irma.
Thank you, Vincent, for moderating in this session. Before we end this session, I would like to give the highest appreciation to our speaker. On behalf of UGM and USIM, I would like to present this certificate to Dr. Lowell Bautista.
Thank you, Lowell.
Thanks, Lowell. Thank you so much, Lowell.
Dr. Bautista. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bautista, for a great session today. Before we end this session, I hope all participants can join in a photo session.
Okay, please turn on your camera. There are 4 slides here. Please get yourself always smile. Okay, I'm start from slide 1. Okay, I'm waiting. Okay, slide 1. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, slide 2. Please get yourself always smile. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. The next slide. 1, 2, and 3. And then the last one. 1, 2, and 3. Smile, everyone. Okay, thank you. You can now turn off your camera.
Thank you, Akram.
This is the end of this session. I would like to apologize for any misconduct but in my action or statement as your master of ceremony. On behalf of the Department of Geodetic Engineering of UGM and the Faculty of Law USIM, thank you so much. Good afternoon and see you in the next session with Mr. Dani Puguh Laksono on Geospatial Technology for Border Management. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much,
Bye-bye.
Azmi. Lowell, thank you.
Lowell, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Doctor.
bye-bye. See you at 2 p.m. today. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks, Andy. See you later.
Thank you. Thank you, Azmi. Safe driving, Azmi.
Thank you very much.